All right, good morning. I have been a long time out of this class. I'm not sure of the normal structure, and I know every time you change a Baptist structure, it takes them about a month to get settled. But you've only got to put up with me for about 2 weeks. Now, I have about 6 weeks of material I'm trying to cram into 2, so you'll apologize if I go quickly. I don't have notes for you for specific reasons. I want you to look through it. I want you to think about what you know about who we're going to be discussing and see if what you know, as it did with me, changes as you go through this character study. We're going to study one individual, some of his life throughout the Bible. So let's open in a word of prayer. Lord, we thank you for your word. We thank you for how as we read it and as we grow in our maturity and understanding that it grows along with us. There's a depth and complexity to the scriptures that we often take for granted. We pull out the parts that we remember and the parts that we enjoy talking about, and those are about all that we focus on. I ask that you would help us today to challenge ourselves. We ask that you would help it to be a time of understanding, of growth, but also one of interest. We ask all these things in your name. Amen. Now, I won't try to do anything like I do normally with the little kids. You'll have to forgive me. I've been teaching like the 3-year-olds up to, second grade for a little while. So, if anybody needs a bathroom break, now's a good time. No. All right, we're going to get started. So, of these 4 categories here, the child, the priest, the prophet, and the judge, can you think of a character in the Old Testament that fits all 4 of those categories? Samuel. Very good. We're not working yet. There we go. All right. So, Zach and I have memory loss every time I stand up here. So don't get offended if I forget your name. I remember all of your faces, but I will stand up here and I just forgot Zach's name. Okay, so don't be offended. Okay, this is normal for me. I'm used to it. All right, brother. Here we go. So we've got 4 roles of Samuel we're going to try to cover. Obviously, the child. This is the story that everybody remembers with his mother, whose name is Hannah. Right? We've also have Samuel as the priest. That was his first role. Even as a child, he started as a priest or a acolyte there in the temple. Then we also have him as the prophet. And then finally, in his later years, as the judge. For much of Samuel's life, you'll see he did, after the child basically, he did all 3 of these roles simultaneously. They were interwoven with one another. He did most of them simultaneously. It's pretty interesting to see how the character of Samuel, who we think is a peripheral character, really shapes Israel during the time of Saul and David. So everybody knows the story of Samuel as a child. I will ask that you go with me to 1 Samuel. I'm going to read some scriptures. Like I said, I've got about 6 weeks of material we're going to try and cover in about 2 weeks. Okay, so I'm going to read fast. Hopefully you can follow fast, but I have all the references here. I'll give them to you at the end of the lesson next week. So Samuel, as a child, his birth is begged of God, right? In 1 Samuel chapter number 1, verses 5 through 20. It's a story that we know very, very well. Verse 5 says, "But unto Hannah he gave a worthy portion." This is talking about Elkanah, the husband. "For he loved Hannah, but the Lord had shut up her womb. Her adversary, the other wife, Peninnah, also provoked her sore, for to make her fret, because the Lord had shut up her womb, as he did Elkanah the husband. So year by year she went up to the house of the Lord. So she provoked her, therefore she wept and did not eat." And we all know the story of her going to Shiloh there and walking into the temple with Eli, and Eli thinking that she was a drunkard, basically, because she was beseeching God over and over again and praying basically so hard, but praying silently, that he thought that she was drunk. What does that tell you about the state of the temple in those days? That it was normal for a drunk person to wander into the temple? That the priest wasn't even surprised? This is the priest whose sons, Hophni and Phinehas, who we'll get to know very much later, whose sons were well known for fornication on the steps of the temple or as part of the temple worship, right? Stealing basically from the sacrifices of God. This is the state of the temple that Samuel returns to. Think about that. I mean, we think of everybody comes here and they put on their Sunday clothes and they come in their, on their best behavior and everybody's here playing church all at the same time. This is a different type of church, a different type of temple. Okay? Where is Samuel's home? Elkanah, if you look at verse 1 of the chapter. Now there was a certain man of Ramathaim Zophim of Mount Ephraim, and his name was Elkanah. Okay? This is Samuel's father. Now, I don't know how well you can see that. I can't see it very well. I'm going to wander, Zach, but I need to point. Okay? So, pointer on a TV, unfortunately. But right underneath this red section is Jerusalem. Right above this red section is Bethel. We'll see a couple other things on this map later. For those of you, the red section where it is Benjamin, right underneath there is. Right above that is Bethel. The hometown of Ramah is about halfway, a little bit to the east of both of those cities. 7 to 12 miles, depending on which scholar you want to agree with. Walk to Shiloh, which is north of Bethel, right above the M there in Ephraim. That is where Shiloh is located. Next week I'll show you this map, and then I'll show you that blown up section right there in the middle so everybody in the back can see it. Or you can just hit me up afterwards, and I got it on a nice little thing I can show you. Okay? So that is where Samuel is from. That is where his parents are traveling from every time they go to Shiloh. It's about a long day's journey. I don't know about any of you. I don't like to run. Okay? So 12 miles for me is about, 2 weeks. But can you imagine trying to get your kids to go 12 miles? I know some of you are big hikers, but okay, or a pregnant lady to go 12 miles. Okay, along with all of your kids, with no coolers, with no backpacks. Okay, just, you're going back to the thoughts of how Mary traveled back in her day. I'm going to let George take his picture here, and then I got to click off. All right. So we see Eli. A lot of people want to say that Eli was prophesying during this passage. I think it is verse 17 of chapter 1. Okay, then Eli answered and said, "Go in peace, and the Lord and the God of Israel grant thee thy petition that thou hast asked of him." A lot of people say, that was a prophecy by Eli. There has been no word of prophecy in the land of Israel since the days of Deborah. Most likely it is just like you would say if somebody was sharing a prayer request. You're saying, "I'll pray for you. I'm going to encourage you. I'm going to pray along with you." That is more the thought, the language in which that is relayed. So I would not call Samuel's birth a prophesied birth, at least not from the lips of Eli. And then you see Samuel's role in the temple, right? Begins at an early age. Everybody wants to talk about when he is weaned. It's really not anything for anybody to argue over. It is anywhere from 3 to 12 years old. He was little. He is younger than I would be comfortable leaving my kid for the rest of his life. Okay? But his mother, who had wanted him, had begged God for him, after he is weaned, basically once he is able to function fairly well on a day-to-day basis without a specific overwatch of his mother, she returns him to the temple with a rather large sacrifice, and she leaves him there. I have a really hard time letting my kids go over to somebody else's house and spend the night unless I know them very well, and it takes a while for me to get to that comfort level. This lady trusted God so much that she dropped her son off, the son that she had begged God for, at the temple. Now, yes, this is not the Catholic Church. It's not just a bunch of men and women in celibacy and separated. This is the temple. They're married. They have wives. There's lots of ladies around. So she was dropping him into a community of Levites, but yet there's a huge separation. There's no phone calls. There's no FaceTime. There's no none of that. Okay? When does she get to see him? So you see later in the passage that she makes him a coat and brings it to him once a year. And you want to get deep into the weeds on what that coat was? I don't really want to get into that. Most likely it's an outer garment to help cover up his linen ephod that he was required to wear in the temple so that he didn't get that dirty, so that he could perform the tasks of the temple. She saw him once a year. Could you imagine the mother that hasn't seen this child for a year making that coat and thinking about him while she's making that coat, trying to guess how big he's going to be, for the next year when she drops it off. The temperatures, I tried to look up the temperatures in Shiloh, but as you will see later on, Shiloh is not exactly a populated area in Jerusalem, even today. And so you try to find out what the temperatures were, but the temperatures around it that I was able to find, it doesn't vary hugely, so it's not like she needed this big, heavy winter coat. In fact, the highs to the lows is like 30 degrees. It's pretty moderate in that area. And then we see at the beginning of chapter 2. I'm trying to run through his childhood here because there's some specific things I want to discuss. But in chapter 2, let's compare verse 11 to verse 18. This is when he gets dropped off. Verse 11 says, "And Elkanah went to Ramah to his house." So he drops off Samuel, he's going home. "And the child did minister unto the Lord before Eli the priest." Okay? What does that sound like? It sounds like some pretty heavy oversight. Right? He's ministering unto the Lord, but under the watch care, the specific guidance of Eli. And then in verse 18, just a few verses later, after we've talked about the sons of Eli, we see, but Samuel ministered before the Lord, not before Eli, being a child, girded with a linen ephod. He took his job seriously, unlike the sons of Eli. We see a huge contrast between this child that is promised and is dropped off into the temple versus the children that were raised there in the temple. And then we see something interesting as we get to the beginning of chapter 3, another well-known section in Samuel's life. "And the child Samuel ministered unto the Lord before Eli, and the word of the Lord was precious in those days. There was no open vision." No open vision. What does that refer to? There's no known prophets. Okay? Nobody is coming out, is traveling the land saying, "Thus saith the Lord," this is new revelation from God. Which leads us to believe that possibly the last word of prophecy was in the times of the judge Deborah, almost 150 years before the days of Eli, which means the entire ministry of Eli, and likely a large portion of the time before Eli, there's been no clear vision. There's been no one saying, "Thus saith the Lord." There's been no one saying, "This is what the Lord has specifically guided us and is directing us to do." Could you imagine in those days where they do not have the scriptures to have no one saying, "Thus saith the Lord" for a generation and a half or 2 generations? Eli died when he was how old? 98. His entire life there has been no prophet of God. In the end of chapter 2, right before we see that verse in chapter 3, the end of chapter 2 in verse 27, we see a prophecy about the house of Eli. And I want to give Eli some credit here because, like I said, there's been no there's been no revelation of God in the last 100 and some years, 150 years. And so in verse 27, this unnamed prophet comes up and says this about the house of Eli. And I want to read it because it's going to be crucial to our study come later. "And there came a man of God unto Eli, and said unto him, Thus saith the Lord, Did I plainly appear unto the house of thy father when they were in Egypt, in Pharaoh's house? And did I choose him out of all the tribes of Israel to be my priest, to offer upon mine altar, to burn incense, to wear an ephod before me? And did I give unto the house of thy father all the offerings made by fire of the children of Israel? Wherefore kick ye at my sacrifice and mine offering, which I have commanded in my habitation, and honorest thy sons above me, to make yourselves fat with the chiefest of all the offerings of Israel my people? Wherefore the Lord God of Israel saith, I said indeed that thy house and the house of thy father should walk before me forever. But now the Lord saith, Be it far from me, for them that honor me I will honor, and they that despise me shall be lightly esteemed. Behold, the days come that I will cut off thine arm, and the arm of thy father's house, that there shall not be an old man in thine house, and thou shalt see an enemy in my habitation, and all the wealth which God shall give Israel, and there shall not be an old man in thine house forever. And the man of thine whom I shall not cut off from mine altar shall be to consume thine eyes, to grieve thine heart, and all the increase of thine house shall die in the flower of their age. And this shall be a sign unto thee, that thou and shall come upon thy two sons, on Hophni and Phinehas. In one day they shall die both of them. And I will raise me up a faithful priest, that shall do according to that which is in mine heart and in my mind, and I will build him a sure house, and he shall walk before mine anointed forever. And it shall come to pass that every one that is left in thine house shall come and crouch to him for a piece of silver and a morsel of bread, and shall say, Put me, I pray thee, into one of the priest's offices, that I might eat a piece of bread. Now, if you haven't had a prophet, if you haven't interacted with a prophet of God before, and this person comes up and says, Thus saith the Lord, and you are the high priest, how would you react? Surprise? Skeptic? Eli does what most of us would do. Let's see. He does nothing. In fact, he likely gives it no more thought, no credit, no weight. He doesn't even record the name of the guy that decided to come and tell him this. We have no idea who this man of God was. And yet we will see it impact Eli in his later days. Most likely he's slow to add weight to it. And it wasn't something that he was expecting. And that is why the very next verse, after this prophecy, we see that the word of the Lord was precious. We haven't had any of this in times past. Now I want to get to this call of Samuel. This is something that we're very, very familiar with. If you've been through any kind of Sunday school program, you've done the flannel graphs. At least I did flannel graphs. Flannel graphs are kind of becoming a thing of the past. I can't tell you the last time I punched out flannel graph and put it up on the board for the kids over there. I know that you do a lot of it, and I think it's a great visual cue, but everything has become so digitalized that half of it doesn't even make it to the classroom anymore. Okay? So let's talk about the call of Samuel. Okay? Samuel answered on which call of God? How many times did God call Samuel? I see 3, 3, 3, 3. Everybody says 3. This is the fourth. He went to see Eli 3 times. 3 times he goes to Eli. 3 times he goes and says, What do you need? What do you need? What do you need? Eli's blind almost at this point. And so Samuel is very attuned to the needs of Eli, who knows where his children are, Eli's children are. But Samuel's down the hall. This is how it envisions in everybody's mind, right? And you've got the sheetrocked walls and the wooden floors or the carpeted floors, and you've got the doors that open and close like you did in your house. And Samuel's calling like your parents did from the back room, or Eli's calling Samuel from the back room, and you go running in there. Well, that's not how the temple was built. And yet that's where our brains, our American brains, our young brains take it. And so Eli, who knows where Eli was sitting? I'm not going to pretend to know, but you have to put yourself in the time period. Okay? They didn't have electric lights to flip on when they had to go find something. Part of Samuel's job is tending the lamps of the temple. Guess what? Lamps run out of oil. He has a linen ephod. Have you ever tried to get soot out of linen? Okay? Probably why his mother made him an outer garment every year to wear over that linen ephod. So that is one of Samuel's primary roles. So he is probably getting up multiple times a night to make sure the flame hasn't gone out on the lamp of God. He hears Eli, what he thinks is Eli calling, and he goes running to find Eli, and Eli is sleeping. You ever had that grandparent that just kind of falls asleep in the middle of dinner? Or sometimes right after dinner? Or maybe it's you, or maybe it's me. I do the same. Okay? He goes and finds Eli resting wherever he's resting in the middle of the night and wakes him up, and Eli says, Well, it wasn't me. Well, it wasn't me. It has been 150 years since any kind of specific prophecy happened. Nobody's used to this. After 3 times, Eli says, the high priest, the reigning religious leader of the time, says, Maybe it's God. Say this. And so the 4th time God calls, let's look at it in verse number 10 of chapter 3. What does it say? Anybody want to read that?
And the Lord came and stood and called
There's something very interesting in the very beginning of that verse. God came and stood. Likely, this is not a vision that Samuel is having. This is a being that Samuel sees, but he doesn't know who it is. He says, "Speak, Lord, for thy servant heareth," but okay, that's something that Eli told me to say. And this is still Samuel at a young age. He is still a child, and listen to what God gives him. Verses 11 through 14. And the Lord said to Samuel, "Behold, I will do a thing in Israel, at which both the ears of everyone that heareth it shall tingle. In that day I will perform against Eli all the things which I have spoken," refer back to chapter 2, "concerning his house. When I begin, I will also make an end. For I have told him that I will judge his house forever for the iniquity which he knoweth, because his sons made themselves vile, and he restraineth them not. And therefore I have sworn unto the house of Eli, that the iniquity of Eli's house shall not be purged with sacrifice nor offering forever." It means Eli's past the point of return. The man that you have been taking care of for the past however many years. That is the very first thing God ever speaks to Samuel as a kid. How do you like that to be your introduction to understand that you are now going to be a prophet? That this man that you care about, God's going to wipe his family off the face of the earth. It's going to be a judgment that will shock the nation. This is not just the judgment on the house of Eli. Go with me to Psalm 78. Keep your finger there in 1 Samuel. We're going to come right back to it. But go with me to Psalm 78. Verses 56 to 64. You're going to think about the time of Samuel, then listen to these verses here. You're going to see a lot of references corresponding to one another here. "Yet they tempted and provoked the Most High God," Hophni and Phinehas, "and kept not his testimonies, but turned back and dealt unfaithfully like their fathers. They were turned aside like a deceitful bow. For they provoked him to anger with their high places, and moved him to jealousy with their graven images. When God heard this, he was wroth, and greatly abhorred Israel, so that he forsook the tabernacle of Shiloh." This is where Samuel is serving with Eli. "In Shiloh, the tent which he placed among men, and delivered his strength." God delivers his strength into captivity. What happens right in chapter 4 of 1 Samuel? We take the ark like a talisman to defeat the Philistines, and we lose. And the ark, the symbol of God's strength, is taken by the Philistines. "And delivered his strength into captivity, and his glory into the enemy's hands. He gave his people over also to the sword." 30,000 plus Israelites died in that defeat. "And was wroth with his inheritance. The fire consumed their young men. Their maidens were not given to marriages. The priests fell by the sword." Who died when the ark was taken? Hophni and Phinehas. "Priests died by the sword. Their widows made no lamentation. And the Lord awaked as one out of sleep, and like a mighty man that shouteth by reason of wine, he smote his enemies in the hinder parts, and put them to a perpetual reproach." That doesn't come until much later. This is not just the loss of Eli's line. This is something that is going to be dramatic for the entire nation. Yes, it is dramatic when someone dies. It is dramatic when multiple generations die. But the whole nation doesn't talk about it. This is something that the whole nation talks about. Verse 14 of chapter 4, quickly. "And when Eli heard the noise of the crying," this is after the battle. "When Eli heard the voice of the crying, he said, What meaneth the noise of the tumult? And the man came in hastily and told Eli. Now Eli was 98 years old. His eyes were dim, and he could not see. And the man said unto Eli, I am he that came out of the army, and I fled today out of the army. And he said, What is there done, my son? And the messenger answered and said, Israel is fled before the Philistines, and there hath been also a great slaughter among the people, and thy two sons also, Hophni and Phinehas, are dead, and the ark of God is taken." What did the prophecy in chapter 2 say? They're both going to die on the same day. They're the caretakers of the ark. The ark is captured, and both of the priests there are slaughtered. Verse 18, and it came to pass when he made mention of the ark of God, not his sons, that Eli fell from the seat backwards by the side of the gate, and his neck brake, and he died. For he was an old man and heavy. That sounds like an accusation. And he had judged Israel for 40 years. And his daughter-in-law, Phinehas' wife, was with child, near to be delivered. And when she heard the tidings that the ark of God was taken, and that her father-in-law and her husband were dead, she bowed herself and travailed, for her pains came upon her. And about the time of her death, the women that stood by her said unto her, Fear not, for thou hast borne a son. But she regarded it not, neither did she regard it. And she named this child Ichabod, saying, The glory is departed from Israel, because the ark of God was taken, and because of her father-in-law and her husband. And she said, The glory is departed from Israel, for the ark of God is taken. Eli falls off the wall, or Hophni and Phinehas are killed. Eli falls off the wall. The wife of Phinehas goes into early labor, dies in early labor. The child survives, but what does the prophecy in chapter 2 say? None of his children are going to live to be an old man. Quit. There goes. The ark never returns to Shiloh. Shiloh, the head of worship at that time where the high priest and his family live, is likely desecrated after this battle is lost, because the ark went over, the Philistines won, the Philistines follow everybody that's running, and they come probably to Shiloh, and they wipe it out. Doesn't tell us how Samuel got away, doesn't tell us where Samuel went. We don't see Samuel again for a few more chapters until chapter 7, where he sends them back to defeat the Philistines. But you follow the ark. The ark goes from, let me see if I have the map here. Okay, that's Shiloh, where the circle is, right above the M in Ephraim. It goes to the east. Right at the top of the P, there's a little red dot. You may be able to see it. Okay, that is where the battle was fought. When it is taken to the temple of Dagon, that's a really fun read if you ever want to learn about the power of God and what he thinks of graven images. Okay, so it goes to the temple of Dagon. Dagon keeps falling over, breaking into pieces, so they say, we got to get rid of this thing. The Philistines put it on a cart, they send it back to Israel, and it goes down there to the bottom where it's Killeth Jearim, and from there, it goes to, what's the name of that one? Killeth Jearim is where it rests. Beth Shemesh. The Israelites are so excited they open the ark. Not a smart idea, because they were told not to do so. And God kills a whole bunch of them, somewhere between 70 and 50,000 in 70, depending on how you interpret that passage of Scripture, because they opened and looked inside the ark of God. I don't know if they wanted to make sure it was the ark or what, but not a smart move on their part. So they say, we got to get rid of it. They kick it over to Kiriath Jearim, where David retrieves it after about 100 years. Almost 100 years, the ark does not rest in the temple. From Shiloh, it goes to the Philistines. From the Philistines, it goes down to some farmers in Beth Shemesh. And from Beth Shemesh, it goes to Killeth Jearim. I can't read it from here because I don't have my glasses. Don't blow it up. It'll just throw everything off. Okay? Kiriath Jearim. I had it in my head and then I lost it. Okay? That's one of that part of that name thing. Okay? And it stays there basically until David retrieves it. Look at Jeremiah 26. You ever remember later in the Bible where God refers to Sodom and Gomorrah? And he talks about the destruction of cities, not just those two, of what he has done to them because of their lack of belief, because of their poor choices, because of their blasphemy. Look in Jerusalem. In Jeremiah 26, verse 6. Then I will make this house like Shiloh. Sound familiar? And will make this city a curse to all the nations of the earth. Verse 9 says, Why hast thou prophesied in the name of the Lord, saying, This house shall be like Shiloh, and this city shall be desolate, without an inhabitant. And all the people were gathered against Jeremiah in the house of the Lord. Shiloh, once it's destroyed, is never inhabited again. It's a tourist attraction today. Remember, Samuel's a little kid. Somewhere still where he would be considered a child. In fact, if you look at the Hebrew, I'm not a Hebrew expert. where was the lady we were talking about Hebrew earlier, back there in the back? Hey, I don't pretend to be a Hebrew expert. I read a whole bunch of commentaries, and they said the translation of this passage where it talks about Samuel, it says the child was a child. Okay? He's a little kid. That's who God talks to. Guess what Samuel can't do the rest of the night? Go back to 1 Samuel chapter 3. If you've lost your finger, that's why I have paper in mine. Okay? 1 Samuel chapter 3, verse 15. And Samuel lay until morning. Does it say he slept? No. God just told him he's going to kill everybody that he's familiar with. Basically, all of the males of the house of Eli, none of them are going to live to be an old man. God's going to kill them all. And this child is told this and can't sleep. I couldn't either. Because guess who he gets to see first thing in the morning? Eli. 1 Samuel 3:15. And Samuel lay until the morning and opened the doors of the house of the Lord. Does he run to Eli right away? No. He just says, I'm going to go do the things that I know I need to do. You ever get so frustrated you just go work? Okay? This is what Samuel's doing. He doesn't know what to do. He doesn't know how to process it. So he's just going to go do the routine tasks. Try to make it through the day. And Samuel opened the house of the Lord, and Samuel feared to show Eli the vision. Then Eli called Samuel and said, Samuel, my son. And he answered, Here am I. And he said, Eli, what is the thing that the Lord hath said unto thee? I pray thee, hide it not from me. God do so to thee, and more also, if thou hide anything from me of all the things that he said unto thee. Eli wasn't there when God told Samuel what all those things were. What did Eli just tell him? Either tell me or God's going to make all this happen to you. That's kind of a pretty harsh imprecation, right? Eli doesn't know what he's talking about. This is the way they were talking in those days. That's the way they were interacting. And yet, what does Samuel do? Does he hide it? He tells him. I've had this conversation with my children. I'm sure most of you have had it with your children. It is so much better and easier to deal with a situation if you tell me about it than if I find out about it. Okay? Don't compound lies on top of another mistake. I have had this conversation with at least, guarantee you, with every one of my children, and one of them within the last 48 hours. Okay? Just be honest. I'm not expecting you to be perfect. Just be honest. Because what happens if Samuel's not honest after verse 17? Eli just said, same thing to you, buddy, if you don't tell me. And in verse 18, he relays everything to Eli. And Samuel told him every whit and hid nothing from him. And he said, It is the Lord. Eli responds, It is the Lord. Let him do what he seemeth good. Eli is the high priest of anyone in the country. I did it after all. Okay? He said, I'm going to move these. Some people hit him with their hands. And I told him I'm not going to hit it. And I still did. Okay? Of anyone in the country, anyone of the known world, this should be the guy that understands God the most. And Eli knows his children have not been doing right. In fact, he was warned of it previously in chapter 2. And he did nothing. And his children have still continued in that vein. And so Eli is resigned at this point that God's going to do what he said he was going to do. But interestingly, look at verses 19 and 20. We gloss over these a lot. And Samuel grew. He's a kid. He's growing up. And the Lord was with him, and did let none of his words fall to the ground. It's a very colorful phrase. What does it mean? What did Samuel just become in the previous verses? Well, he was a priest. He just became in the previous verses a what? A prophet. None of his words fell to the ground means everything he said came true. If he said the Lord's going to let it rain in 3 days, it rained in 3 days. Every time Samuel stood up and said, Thus saith the Lord, from this point forward, it happened. His fame is known in verse 20. All Israel, from Dan even to Beersheba, knew that Samuel was established to be a prophet of the Lord. You see those two B's right there? To be a prophet? They're slanted in my Bible. You know what that means in the King James? It means that somebody entered that in there saying that, I think it reads better if we add these two words. Take those two out. That Samuel established a prophet of the Lord. Okay? Not to be. He already was. Look 4 verses ahead. Okay? Established as a prophet of the Lord. Dan to Beersheba is like 150 miles. This is way before cars, right? This is like even before Jesus' day. You didn't travel long distances. In the year 2000, I moved to the mountains of North Carolina. Like way out in the mountains of North Carolina where there's one road to go over the mountain. There is no other way unless you want to walk. Okay? I went to high school with people that to this day have never been out of the county. Some of them have never been off the mountain. Okay? This is Bible times. You didn't travel unless you were going to the temple for a celebration. You didn't go anywhere. So for 150 miles, his status of a prophet is verified. It's a lot in 2 little verses that sometimes we gloss over. Okay? Remember when we say in verse 7? Okay, look back at 3:7. Now Samuel did not yet know the Lord, neither was the word of the Lord yet revealed unto him. Look at verse 21. And the Lord appeared again in Shiloh, for the Lord revealed himself to Samuel in Shiloh by the word of the Lord. God says we need to get to know each other because you are going to be my voice to the nation of Israel from this point forward. We see Samuel as the child, all the way basically until the end of chapter 3. We see him as the priest throughout the rest of Samuel's life. We'll even look at it a little bit next week. Samuel functions as a priest. Verse 35. Chapter 2, verse 35. The first part of that is, this is the prophecy against who? This is the prophecy against Eli, who is the high priest. Okay? Eli dies in chapter 4. Okay? Who is verse 35 talking about? Everybody says Samuel, right? Which means that in our brains, in my brain especially, who becomes high priest when Eli dies? Everybody says Samuel. Okay? It's not Samuel. Okay? Samuel can't be high priest. I'm sorry? He is a Levite. Okay? And let me show you where some of that discrepancy comes from, right? We'll go back to chapter 1, verse 1. Okay? Now there was a certain man of Ramath Zophim. I'm just going to say Ramath, okay? Zophim of Mount Ephraim. He was of Mount Ephraim. That means that he lived in the mountains of Ephraim. Okay? He wasn't an Ephraimite. He was of Ephraim. Okay? And then it gives his heritage, basically his lineage, right? His name was Elkanah, the son of Jerome, the son of Elihu, the son of Tohu, the son of Zuph, an Ephratite, right? That's where Zoph lived. Okay? House of thy father in verse 27, chapter 2, verse 27. And again, we see it later. Where was it? In verse 30. Said indeed that thy house and the house of thy father refers to whose house? Right? Eli's house. But it refers back to his lineage. And Eli can trace his lineage back to who? Okay, think back Old Testament, where the high priest came from? Aaron, right? So referring to Aaron, son of Amram, son of Kohath, son of Levi. Okay, there we go. That is Eli's heritage. Okay, if you want to really go back to that whole where the priestly line, the high priest line was given to Aaron, it's in Exodus 27:21. Okay? Eli is descendant of Ithamar, who is Aaron's youngest son. Okay? Aaron had 3 sons. Ithamar is the youngest. Eleazar was the oldest. At some point, we're not sure exactly where, the transition was made from the line of Eleazar over to the line of Ithamar, and that's how Eli became high priest. Okay? You want to go to 1 Chronicles chapter 6. I've got that reference in there for you later. But that's where all of the lineages are given. And they're trying to combine 3 different house lineages. And I spent like 3 hours looking at this yesterday, okay? I tried to simplify it for you. I don't want to confuse you, okay? But it's all there, okay? Eli's a descendant of Ithamar, which is Aaron's youngest son. So you've got Aaron, Amram, Kohath, and then up to Levi. Okay? At some point, it transitions, okay, in 1 Chronicles chapter 6. Elkanah is a descendant of Korah. Yeah, that Korah. Okay? Elkanah is a descendant of Korah, who is the son of Ishhar, who is the son of Kohath, who is the son of Levi. So Korah and Aaron are what? Cousins. Okay? First cousins, actually. Okay, so Ishhar and Amram are brothers. Okay? I'd point if I could. Okay? Maybe I'll make you a genealogy chart. Okay? Because I spent a whole long time doing this. Okay? But basically what this means is that Samuel is not allowed to ever be high priest. Who becomes the high priest after Eli? It doesn't specify, okay, exactly who follows Eli. It does specify who becomes high priest later. Okay? Samuel's ineligible basically because there is no direct line to Aaron. Okay? Aaron was his great uncle. Raise me up a faithful priest in verse 35 is referring most likely to Zadok. Okay? All the way down to Solomon. Solomon anoints Zadok. Okay? So remember we had Eleazar, the oldest of Aaron, Ithamar, the youngest son of Aaron. Ithamar was Eli's great-great-grandfather. Okay? Eleazar was the original line where the high priest went through. At some point it transitioned. Well, God is saying, I am going to wipe out the line of Eli that traces back to Ithamar. And I'm going to put it back under Eleazar, the oldest. But it still goes back to Aaron, right? Aaron had like 3 sons. So Ithamar's line that goes to Eli is all wiped out. In the days of Solomon in 1 Kings chapter 2, you want to go read it. You don't make the connection unless you're in 1 Samuel first. But there was Abiathar and there was Zadok. Abiathar is Ithamar's. I'm sorry, I shouldn't switch hands on you. Abiathar was Eli's grandson. Zadok was Eleazar's great-great-great-great-grandson. Eleazar's son, Zadok, follows Solomon. Abiathar follows the split. And so when Solomon is elected king, or not elected king, but when Solomon becomes king, he anoints Zadok. And Abiathar is cast from the priestly line, from the temple. What did Levites do for income? They were priests. Where did all of their income come from? The temple. So if you're not a priest and you're a Levite, what do? Look at chapter 2. It tells you exactly what you have to do. 1 Samuel chapter 2. Verse 36. And it shall come to pass that every one that is left in thine house, talking about Eli's line, okay, shall come and crouch to him, the new high priest, Zadok, for a piece of silver and a morsel of bread, and shall say, Put me, I pray thee, into one of the priest's offices. Let me back in, so that I can gain an income. You got to go all the way to the time of Solomon, who, remember, we haven't even elected Saul yet, okay, before this prophecy is finally fulfilled. The roles of Samuel that we're going to talk about, the child. Yeah, it mostly refers to his age. But keep his age in mind when you look at some of the tasks that he has given. His very first prophecy as a tender, basically, of the lamp, of his mentor line going to be completely eradicated. The priest. He's a priest because of his, yes, he is a Levite. He's not of the he's not a descendant of Aaron. He can't be high priest. He's still a priest. He's still a Levite. He functions as a priest, all throughout 1st and 2nd Samuel, anointing kings. He anointed 2 kings. Okay, we know both of them very well. It is Saul and David, right? And then as the prophet, basically starting in chapter 3, all the way through the rest of his life, Samuel functions as a prophet. You know, an interesting thing that Samuel does that we don't often give him credit for is as a judge. Okay? The judges were basically traveling magistrates. He had a circuit that he went on. Okay? And it tells us his circuit. We'll talk about that next week. Okay? I've got some interesting things to discuss next week. Okay? And that is Samuel. Thank you for your time. I'm going to let you go because I'm running late. And I see a lot of people standing in the back.